Welcome to the 12th episode of Nature Aventure Survie, the podcast.
Nature Aventure Survie!
When it comes to navigation, we usually use GPS or compasses. But did you know that even plants can give you clues about where is the north, where is the south? Today, it's really a pleasure to interview the natural navigator.
Ça va, nous allons finir par mourir de soif sur ce fichu rafio.
Si ça continue, capitaine, nous serons bientôt au régime du docteur Bombard.
Ouais.
Wilson! Wilson!
Well, hello Tristan, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much. You are known as the natural navigator. You were a host for the BBC, I think. You are also a pilot who set the world record, if I'm right. Can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I had a passion for navigation from a young age, from before I even knew the word navigation. I was one of those kids who would see a hill and think it might be more interesting at the top than the bottom, and then the hills became mountains, and crossing lakes became crossing oceans. And I learned that navigation was the skill that allowed me to shape my own journeys, because if you have no navigation skills, then you have to be a passenger because you're relying on somebody else who is the navigator. And there's nothing wrong with being a passenger, but it's nice to be a navigator because then you can choose the journey. You know, even if it's what seems like a boring journey, maybe walking for 10 minutes in a town you know well. If you're navigating, you can choose it. If you're lost and you're following somebody else, you can't choose it. So to me, it didn't matter really whether they were big or small journeys. From a young age, I thought, well, I want to understand the art that is navigation. And then the journeys did become bigger, but I learned that the size of a journey doesn't determine how rewarding it is, physically or philosophically, but how you shape that journey does. So natural navigation, I realized, could make a very short journey, less than 1 kilometer, as interesting as one that was perhaps 1,000 kilometers. And that's how it all happened.
Okay, and so you traveled a lot, I think, around the Earth. Maybe it's why you developed that sense of navigation?
Yes, well, the journeys were always about learning for me. There are plenty of adventurers in the world who go on an adventure for the sake of adventure, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's all good, healthy, and fun, particularly when you're young. But for me, it was always about learning. So if I was learning to fly, it's because I wanted to understand how do you get from point A to point B with an aircraft. It wasn't because I wanted the thrill of flying down over a glacier in Greenland. You know, I ended up flying over the glacier because I wanted to learn as much as possible, not because I wanted to know what it felt like to be above a glacier. It's a subtle point, but I'm sure you understand what I mean.
Well, let's get back to Earth now. Can you explain us what is the lost art of natural navigation? It's not something that in France, I think, we truly understand.
Yeah, to me, natural navigation is the art of finding a way using nature. That includes the sun, moon, stars, weather, plants and animals, and even man-made things like buildings. To me, natural navigation is the art of finding a way without using tools. So you can use anything you want so long as you can't hold it in your hands. No map, no compass, no GPS, no sextant even. But you can use things which may not seem like nature to some people, like TV satellite dishes. In the UK, they point quite close to southeast, but everywhere in the world there's a trend, and I'm sure you know the trend in your part of the world as you have an interest in the subject.
So what kind of clues do you have to notice to navigate naturally? Trees, plants, stars?
Well, I teach people to, both when they're out on a walk looking to navigate using nature, but also when they're trying to learn, that the stages to go through are top to bottom. So if you understand how to use the sun and the stars, then you've got a really good start, because the stars are very, very accurate, and the sun is very easy to use and can be very accurate. So the sun is due south in the middle of the day every day of the year in France, as it is in the UK and everywhere north of the tropics. And once you've got used to that, you can take that into a very simple package, which is, if you're anywhere near the middle of the day and you can see the sun, then you must be looking roughly south. And that gives people, the confidence to realize that it's not impossible. And then finding the North Star, it's a straightforward technique. You find what in the UK we call the plough. What do you call it in France?
It's la grande casserole.
Yeah. Well, we call it the saucepan here sometimes. Particularly children love using the saucepan here. And I think it is one of the best descriptions, because it's one of the few names that it really looks like, doesn't it?
Well, the real name is Le Grand Chariot.
Yes, yeah.
But I prefer the grande casserole.
And you probably use the Latin derivatives from the bear as well occasionally.
Not the Latin names actually.
No, okay.
No, only French names. Yeah.
Right. And then once people have realized through the sun and the stars that it's not impossible, then we can come down and start to do what I think is the more challenging, more interesting part of natural navigation, the part that is more an art. And by art, I mean something that takes a lot of practice and skill, but can be taken to a higher level. So once you know how to find the North Star, I can teach somebody a dozen ways to find the North Star, but it's very hard to make that into an art. There's culture, and it can be historically and culturally rich, but to make that practice of using the North Star into an art is not that easy. But the art of using plants and animals is something that I learn something about every single day, and I've been doing this decades. So that is clearly something that requires more practice. But it starts with very, very simple ideas. There are 19 ways that I've collected to use trees to navigate, and I teach people the simplest ones first. So once you know where the wind comes from, what we call in this country the prevailing wind direction, so the wind can blow from any direction on any day, but there are trends and patterns. And in most of northwest Europe, the wind comes from the southwest or a westerly direction. The mountains can change things depending where you live, but in your area, once you get to know where it's come from and you look at the tops of exposed trees and you notice they've just been brushed over, then every tree there becomes a compass. That's the easiest to use. There are lots of more subtle ones, like the leaves on the south side of a tree tend to be smaller and a lighter color, but that's where it's a real art, because spotting that sort of thing is good fun if you don't need it, but if you're actually using that to navigate, it's quite tough in a fun way.
Yeah, and you have also to learn a little bit of botany, because in your books you'll talk a lot about ivy, lichens, which are good compasses too. Yes,
well, I think again this is like all disciplines. There's a basic entry point, and it does no harm to be taught one or two tricks, like how to find south using the sun or north using the stars. But actually, natural navigation becomes deeper, richer, more fascinating when we move away from tricks and we start to look at what some people might term ecology. So if we take the idea that every single plant and animal is part of a map. Now, I'm not just saying that to be poetic. That's to me is true, because plants and animals don't grow randomly. In the wild, they will only grow where they can survive. So, stinging nettles will only thrive in phosphate-rich soil. Human beings, the way we live, work, farm, and die, make the soil richer in phosphates. So stinging nettles are part of a map. They're showing us where human beings have been active and where we've perhaps been looking after animals or being busy. So that's not a north, south, east, west, and it's not a trick. It's a sign that you're getting away from wilderness and back towards civilization. And if we bring in all the other plants around us, we realize that every single one of them is part of this map. I sometimes use the idea of a jigsaw. When we look at a single jigsaw piece, it doesn't appear to tell us very much. But if we start putting a few of them together, we build a picture. It's not a perfect picture unless you find every single jigsaw piece. And that, in natural navigation, is not normally the aim. You don't need every piece. You're just putting enough together so you can go, yes, I've now got a good sense of where I am.
You're talking about ecology, and how did you learn to observe your environment like this? Because even in ecology class, we never learned how to find north or south?
Yeah, it's a good question, and my general way of working is to I'm deliberately sensitive to patterns, trends, and asymmetries. So when I look at a tree and I notice that it's not the same on two sides, my brain is going why, and if we learn to ask ourselves why, it sometimes takes years. So with the ivy, it took me years. For 10 years I was going around looking at ivy, and I kept thinking I cracked it. And then the next stage is when I think I've seen a trend, I don't try and reinvent the wheel. I go out there and look in, the academic world and see, because a lot of the things that I need to help me have been researched by people in the past, but quite often not because they have any interest in natural navigation. So a good example is ivy. I started to spot the way it was growing, and then finally, when I thought I had some patterns to work with, I thought, right, now it's time to go, and I should have done it earlier in this case, but I went and had a look in the academic world, and there are scientists who are interested in phototropism, the way plants grow towards the light or away from it. And they had done some good work, which helped me understand. But for me, it's a two-step process, or sometimes more, but mainly noticing trends and patterns and, as I say, asymmetries, and then trying to explain it. And if I can, the expression "standing on the shoulders of giants." I'm not inventing all of this stuff. Human beings have been noticing things for thousands of years before I was born. But it's quite often a case of noticing the trend, and then I sometimes feel like I'm foraging, but not foraging to feed myself. I'm foraging for knowledge that quite often has either been lost or is hidden. So foresters in Norway and Sweden have discovered amazing things about trees and the way roots grow there, the way tree roots grow. And I was able to use that to reinforce what I'd noticed about the way the roots grow longer and stronger and bigger on the side the wind comes from. So the foresters in Norway and Sweden had collected, to my mind, a real treasure sort of pot of information about tree growth that helped me accelerate my understanding for natural navigation. But they have no interest in natural navigation. That's the funny thing. So sometimes my job is to notice new things, but most of the time it is noticing patterns and trends, and then understanding, borrowing from other places and bringing it all together. Sometimes it means, finding something in the latest journals, the Nature journal. There might be something published in, real cutting edge science that's only been in the public domain for weeks sometimes. And the next week I'm using something that's appearing in an ancient myth, the way Odysseus saw the bear constellation on his left, and that meant he was traveling east. And it's all, to me, it's all fair game. I'm not an academic, so I don't have to be focusing just on the very latest research. If it helps me in this field and it's 2,000 years old, then I'm delighted.
And you also ask people to send you photos of trends or things that they noticed.
Absolutely, yeah. I really enjoy that, because when I started doing natural navigation, in a nice way, it was quite lonely. I thought, well, this really can't be of interest to anybody else, so I'll just get on with it, and if I enjoy it and it's not hurting anybody, I'll just keep going. But now, through the books and through a little bit of media work and things like that, and interviews like yours, the word is getting out, and it's very nice for me, because it feels now that there is a community. It's not an enormous one, but it is growing. And I think it's quite like how foraging was maybe 50 years ago or so, because in the Second World War there was a need to forage for the first time in a long time for food. The supply of fresh food was cut off during the war. And there was a big movement in this country, and I'm sure it was the same in your country, for suddenly finding that there's food in hedgerows and places like that. And that was going back to foraging for necessity. But it wasn't until, I don't think, about the 1970s, people started to say, do you know what? We don't have to forage. We're not going to starve to death if we don't forage. But it's fun, it's challenging, it's interesting, and it's satisfying on an intellectual level. And I think natural navigation is now at the stage, probably 40 years maybe later than foraging, where people are going, we don't need to do this. It's on our smartphones, on our GPSs, all the rest. but it is interesting, it's satisfying, it's challenging, it's rewarding. So let's do it for those reasons.
Well, navigation is a part of some bushcraft schools or survival schools. Are you a bushcraft enthusiast?
Bushcraft and survival for me are obviously related but slightly different areas. Survival skills I think are brilliant, but I always want people who are involved in it not to teach it because it may be necessary. I think that's a that's a small way to get people interested, because it's so easy for people to say, do you know what, I don't think I'm going to be in a survival situation, and I'm prepared to take that chance. So I think bushcraft for me is slightly more interesting, and within bushcraft, I find there are a lot of people who know a lot more about a lot of the skills within bushcraft, and that to me is one of the things I find most interesting. So whether it's starting a fire with a bow drill or these sorts of things, I find doing that interesting. But the thing that really gets me excited is when I find passionate experts within niches of bushcraft. So, for example, somebody who's spent 20 years perhaps making, whittling spoons. You know what I mean? I suddenly go, because I see a fellow soul there. I think the world needs people who are teaching these skills in a general way, but for me personally and on a selfish level, I get real excited when I see somebody within bushcraft who says, that's my area, all I'm interested in is how to make a shelter, and I'm going to give the next 20 or 30 years to just understanding the history, the culture of that art, and if I can, taking it to a new level, because then I see a kindred spirit. But I find the whole area interesting and positive, particularly with young people.
Yeah, and bushcraft is something it's like an heritage from our ancestors, just like natural navigation.
Absolutely, yes. I see natural navigation. It's part of the broader bushcraft family, but it's probably the most overlooked area at the moment. I think a lot of people who come to bushcraft are familiar with what I might call the homemaking part of it. So, we need fire, we need food, we need shelter. Those parts I think are well known. But there's a joke amongst navigators, which you will have heard, which is, if you get the navigation right, you don't need any of that stuff. But of course, it's not about what you need. So it is just a joke. I mean, making a fire using a fungus or something like that. It's about the satisfaction of, as you say, connecting with ancestors and proving to ourselves that we've still got it. There's something very satisfying in that.
And is it a way also to make it, to make sure nobody forget this art?
Yes, I think that's interesting, because I read somewhere quite a long time ago that you don't change human behavior by telling people that they should or should not do things. It's an interesting psychological thing, and I think I certainly remember as a child, if a teacher told me I shouldn't do something, it just made me want to do it. So I think into adulthood, a lot of us, will not be encouraged to do these things, because otherwise something bad will happen. So to answer your question, I think if you say to people, we should do these skills because otherwise they will all die away, I think that even if it's true, I don't think it's an effective line to take, because, people will go, so what? It's you don't change the behavior that way. The way I think that we change behavior is by saying, it doesn't matter whether these skills, live or die, but I'd encourage you to try them, because they are really, really good fun. And, once you try it, you'll understand. Just try it once because it's fun, rather than we should all be doing this, otherwise this knowledge will go, even though that may be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Well, natural navigation is something precise, or is it just a general picture you can get of the nature? Can you consider the idea of getting rid of a GPS or a compass while hiking?
Well, two parts to your question. I think natural navigation can be as precise as you want it to be, but I don't encourage people to obsess about precision early on, because the way to be precise is is to be a bit pedantic, and that's not how to get into anything at the beginning. I remember when I was taught piano, and I find music is another good analogy. When I was taught piano as a child, it was all about you must learn this scale and you must do it well, and we cannot move on to the next scale until you are doing this scale perfectly. And predictably, I never enjoyed music until I was much, much older. I was a late teenager, and I met somebody who just played jazz piano. And he said, you can't get it wrong. He said, look, I'll show you a trick. You only play these notes, and if you stick to that one simple rule, you can play them whenever you want, however you want, you know. And then he went around the room, and we all had different instruments. We played jazz for the next 2 hours, and we didn't stop, and it's the most fun. And I thought, well, if somebody had done that to me, 10 years earlier, things might have been different. But they wouldn't have been, because I'm rubbish at music. But the second part of your question, can we leave GPS and things at home? I think it's possible to do that and be safe if you're sensible, but I don't encourage it, because I think we live in an exciting time where we can have the best of both worlds. So I regularly have things like GPS and map and compass and things on me, even if I'm in a local area, but I don't spend my whole time looking at them. So just because you have them on you, that it doesn't mean that they are the dominant experience. And I often say every second we spend looking, even at a traditional paper map, is a second that we're not seeing the world around us. So even in a beautiful map, you're getting a very pale view of the world. If you're lucky, your map may have a dozen colours on it, but the world has a million. So you're giving up almost a million colours every time you look at your map. Is one way of thinking of it.
And maybe the GPS or the compass can be here to confirm what you expected from natural navigation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good approach to teach people, is to say, if you're doing map and compass navigation, the thing I encourage people is before you look at the compass or the map, just see if the world is telling you the answer first. Because you're obviously looking at the map and the compass because you want an answer of some kind. It might be about direction or it might be about location. But just have a look around you and just say, it starts with a very simple question: which way am I looking? And you can do that. You don't have to be on a 20-kilometer hike outdoors. You can do it looking out of a school classroom, as you probably have done. But that I think is important. Don't think navigation or natural navigation are isolated activities. Okay, we're not going to do that until June the 12th, and then we're going to go and do natural navigation. To me, it should be at least a few seconds of every day. You can be standing on a train platform and you just say to yourself, which way am I looking? And then you go, okay, it's this time of year, which means the sunrise is here. We're a couple of hours after sunrise. I think we're looking that way. If you then check it on your smartphone and you find you're somewhere near, right, you've got the best of both worlds. You're connecting with nature, you're understanding things, and technology's confirming that for you.
So back to natural navigation, what are the main principles?
Well, I think we touched on these earlier, but I think it's...
This is the end of the first part of our interview with Tristan Gooley. You can visit his website at naturalnavigator.com. Don't hesitate to pay me a visit at natureaventuresurvie.blogspot.com. And of course on my Facebook page. Feel free to let me a comment or even like on Facebook, and I'll get back to you soon. Have a good day, have a good bushcraft.